Welcome, everybody. The voice has just mentioned the fact that we're going to be recording this session. If you're uncomfortable with your image being recorded, just turn it off and just put a nice image instead. Welcome to everybody from the Makers Festival from around the world. My name is Alberto. I am part of the ImpactHub global team, and I'm the Global Development Director. And my camera is quite horrible. Sorry about the blurred image, but it is what it is. I wanted to first of all thank those of you who have attended the sessions until now. It's been an incredibly successful Makers Festival, and we are very excited about the session that is coming up now, which is part of our efforts to become much more inclusive as a network and as a world, and to include that nobody is left behind. And in this sense, we have three speakers here today. First of all, Montgomery, who is a personal friend of mine, and I'm very glad to welcome him here. But also Nico Calvo Rosenstone and Lamia Tandin. Tana, did I pronounce your name correctly? But I think Lamia has not arrived yet, or has she? Sorry, the navigation of Zoom sometimes leaves me at loss. I can't see Lamia, but we can definitely start with, first of all, welcoming Lang and Nico here. Thank you for coming today. First of all, I wanted to start by asking you, how are you? Because this is a hub after all, and we want to make sure that you are well and you're comfortable. So how are you?
Very well, thank you, actually. And also thank you for the invitation to come and speak and connect more with the hub. I personally have heard a lot about the hub. I've seen a lot of the great initiatives that the hub has brought to many people, and I'm just really looking forward to being part of the conversation today.
Thank you, Lang. And welcome, Nico. How are you?
Thank you. Good, doing great, thanks. Similarly, thanks for the invitation. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone who's here. Thanks for being here. Thanks for participating in this conversation ahead of time. And thank you, ImpactHub, for hosting this important space.
So as you can imagine, this is going to be quite one of the highlights of our conversation today and for the whole Makers Festival. I don't think there has been an opportunity before today of engaging with the trans community on a global scale like this in our festivals, in our events. We have, of course, had LGBT-related events and LGBT efforts in single impact hubs, but one on a global scale like this is the first time. And so there will be some people that are attending this call for the first time who are unfamiliar from sometimes with some of the terminologies and the words that are used. So first of all, if that's okay with you, I would like to ask to bring us up to speed all on a couple of terms and terminologies, because people may be sometimes confused. I was certainly confused when I started my own journey, and my confusion started with, sorry, someone else calling on WhatsApp simultaneously, which has to be turned off. My confusion started, my seeking of clarity started asking you, what's the difference between transsexual, transgender, as a terminology? How do we navigate these particular differences? What is a transgender person exactly?
Well, okay, well, that's a great question. Well, trans or transgender, it seems to be an umbrella term that's quite widely used and interchangeable. So under the trans umbrella, there are people that identify predominantly as transgender. You also there are some people that do call themselves transsexual as well, but that does tend to be a slightly more dated term. So a lot of people shorten it to trans, but also under there, it includes people that maybe are gender fluid, gender non-conforming, non-binary, and all of those identities as well. And by that, it means that people that don't identify with either a male or female binary gender. In my experience, I'm a trans man, so therefore that means for me that I did transition from a female identity that I was assigned at birth, and now I use he and him pronouns, and I will be referred to, and I'm seen as a man, and that matches my gender identity.
So I think that was a perfect definition. Like, I really have minimal to add. In the United States, you oftentimes hear the term cisgendered, cis meaning the same, which often refers to individuals who don't identify as anything under the spectrum of gender diversity or transgender. Transsexual, I will say, is also a very outdated term. It's generally even can go as far as being a derogatory term in the United States. So I can only speak for the US context, but generally transgender is the more appropriate term to use.
So transgender is first, as you were saying, is the correct term today to be used, and it can cut across the gender divide. So it can be anyone, can be a transgender person. It doesn't have to be a transgender assigned to a specific sex. And so what does a non-binary mean in that sense? Is it related to this or not?
It is related. Non-binary basically means someone that identifies as neither male or female, or they may have their own term to describe their gender. And just on your point on transgender before, some people don't always say transgender now, they can just use trans. So the shortened abbreviation there is quite acceptable, and it's not going to get you into a lexiconic minefield or anything like that.
Because it is a bit of a minefield sometimes, and it can get very political, of course, as you said. For example, Nico, you said it's become also derogatory to use the term transsexual. So navigating this space, even for those within the LGBT community themselves, becomes very complicated. For those outside the LGBT community, it becomes almost mind-boggling. So this introductory, let's say, lexicon was important for me also to bring everyone up to speed in the room and sort of say, okay, we're talking to two transgender men, and you can see that he and him refer to their gender and identity and how one would want to be referred to normally. And in that sense, I'm curious to hear, first of all, from you, well, what is your experience from a professional point of view? Where do you come from? What is your role that you play in your company or as an individual? And I'll ask Nico first.
Excellent. The only other thing I want to add too is that when we're referring to transgender individuals, we say transgender people, not a transgender or a binary. That we are individuals, we are human beings. And similarly, you would say we just want to make sure that we're encompassing the humanity of the aspect of us individuals. So that's a very important nuance. So I will explain a little bit about who I am. My name is Nico. My pronouns are he, him. Quick visual description for those joining us. I'm a light-skinned man with dark facial hair and dark glasses and dark eyes and brown hair. I'm wearing a white shirt and have a blurred background. I currently work at Twitter as a senior inclusion diversity business partner. Previously, I led a consulting company, the Inclusion Practice, which focused on creating communities where all people can show up as their authentic selves and feel valued. I do this important work of diversity, equity, inclusion to essentially create the change I want to see in the world. So as a young transgender individual, I didn't really have that many role models. So I hope to be that for young trans individuals. It's hard to be what you can't see. So being open about who I am and educating my community hopefully creates safer environments for trans people to thrive and reach their full potential. So it gives you a little context as to why my personal life has in many ways evolved into my professional life.
And welcome to Lamia in the meantime. Kana, sorry. Welcome to our event. I hope you managed to connect now. You have problems with connection, I suspect. And if you would like to give a brief introduction about yourself, who you are, what you do, that'd be great.
All right, thank you so much. And my apology for having the issue getting connected. Hello, I'm Tanha. My pronouns are she, they, and I am the founder and CEO of TransEnd. And it's really good to see you all here. I'm really excited for this session today. So from TransEnd, we help the transgender, the non-binary, and the gender diverse community of our country, Bangladesh, getting them socially and economically empowered them through education, training, healthcare, employment, and entrepreneurship. So before going to talk about my organization, I would like to share a bit about the transgender and the gender diverse populations situation in our country. So in our country, the whole thing, like the gender diverse community, are very, very stigmatized, and they are deprived of every human rights. And these happen since the colonization happened in our country. So the colonizers, they criminalized the transgender community of our country. Locally, they are called as Hijra people. So since then, like 98.5% of the Hijra and the transgender and the non-binary community, they are involved in either sex working or begging. And this is because they get abandoned from their family as well as the society. So before I started the my organization Transcend, I had to face a lot of backlashes, like why I am working for this community, right? Because it's very, 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 very taboo. But when I talk to them, when I got to know their stories, the unprivileged Hijra community story, I found out that without financial inclusion, without financial empowerment, I cannot, or we cannot make these unprivileged community empowered. I mean, there's a lot of NGO in our country. We have like the biggest NGO in the world, which is like BRAC. Still, the poverty line, poverty is here. Still, the Hijra people's life isn't changed, and this is only because nobody ever thought about to design the NGO, especially focusing on transgender people's employment. And even when, yeah, all right.
I'm going to stop you there. Thank you so much, because this introductory actually talk on Bangladesh actually helps us to talk more broadly about how to empower the communities that we're working with. Let me ask just Lang to introduce himself, and then I'm going to ask a question to all of you.
Sure. Hi, my name's Lang Montgomery. I'm in the UK. My pronouns are he and him. Like Nico, I also work in diversity and inclusion, but I work as a consultant. I have worked across private and public sector mostly. And again, I think a lot of my passion to work in diversity and inclusion did form a little bit from my own personal experiences, because this year I'm celebrating 12 years of transitioning. And I found that there was a lot of discrimination in place, but actually from identifying from my own experiences, it made me want to create and build more equity for other marginalized and underrepresented groups, partly because I feel that we do have the right to have a choice about where we work, but also in our workplaces, I like to build places that genuinely do mean that we can bring our whole selves to work or be ourselves in society. So that's been a main passion of mine. And through that, I like to build good relationships. I like to build allyship as well, and just work to ways that we can be viewed rather than being other, being part of society too.
Thank you, Lang and Nico and Tanha. Now, the question, of course, that you brought up, the one that you mentioned around economic empowerment, Tanha, and what you said, Lang, people being able to free to make choices, really for us speaks to an entrepreneurial journey. Like entrepreneurs in many ways, you are entrepreneurs of yourself when you decide to do something that you're passionate about, and you make it happen. And in many ways, a trans journey is that. It's this desire that is almost a mission that you need to accomplish at all costs, because it's part of your identity, part of your being, and you set forth to achieve it. And there are many obstacles on the way. You don't know what the outcome exactly is going to be, except for this kind of idea that you have at the end of the success. And but the obstacles that come in your way are impossible to predict. And that's also the entrepreneurial journey in many ways. And so I was curious to hear, Lang, from you, because for those of you who haven't had the chance, Lang spoke at TEDx London last year. It was a very, very inspiring talk. And one of the things that you said, which was true, because I witnessed it myself, is that you applied how many times for a job before you actually got an interview? It was a ridiculous.
Yeah, in a 3-year period, I had about 189 job rejections, and it was through actually the more open I was on diversity monitoring forms. I found that was working against me. I also realized my name Lang works against me as well. People are expecting me to come from Southeast Asia a lot of the time, so there'd be biases like that coming into the conversation. But ultimately, I think one thing that was causing some of the issue, especially with me talking about having a trans identity, was the fact that a lot of organizations, they were ill prepared, or they didn't know what to do. So it was people's fear that was then turning into prejudice at times, and also was creating barriers. But I've realized that the only issues that I've had in my experience of transitioning have been other people's lack of knowledge, understanding, empathy, and their own ignorance in quite a lot of cases. And that's, to me, what the barriers have been. But I pushed through those. And luckily, where people did take a chance on me, particularly with career choices or hiring managers, you know, they've seen the benefits and that visibility that it's brought. And also I've made sure in any job I have that I've remained visible, because it's allowed other people in the organizations that I've worked in to be visible too. And also just to provide a better context really. And also just to remind people that we do have a place in society and that we are part of that and that we're not to be pushed out, and we can provide valuable contributions. And being trans isn't the whole point of our whole existence and identity. Transition is a part of that, but there is also a point, well, for me anyway, where I just think I just want to live my life and I just want to get on and do all the things that everyone else does, because being trans isn't my whole identity. I have many other intersections. I have many other points that make me who I am.
Indeed. And so community in Bangladesh, what does your NGO do in terms of empowering them in economic terms and in social terms? Did you hear the question? Sorry, the internet is a bit unstable.
Yeah, can you repeat, please?
Sorry, I said, so you mentioned before that your NGO is trying to empower the Bangladeshi trans community, but how do you do that in practice? And tell us a bit more, maybe some stories of how it has transformed some people's lives in Bangladesh.
Yeah, all right. So as I have said that it's pretty much stigmatized in our country to even sit beside a transgender people, and the transgender people, they are deprived of a lot of rights, including education, and without proper education they won't get a good job. Even though there's like a lot of people who had a decent amount of education and has degrees, yet they cannot, as Ling said, because of the gender identity, they often face discrimination. So we focused on that. We had the way we work. The first stage is training. We try to train, because in the recent world, not all the beside the degrees, we need certain level of other skills, right? So what we do is we train the hijra people, the transgender people, with various trainings like communication, leadership, entrepreneurship, and then there's behavioral training, because there's this myth that the hijra people, they are loud, they are very misbehaved, they're rude, since they ask for money and beg for money in streets. So this is why we ensure all these trainings are done, and then these population are getting these criteria, this skill, and
skills,
then
maybe,
yeah, right. And then we go to the corporates. We work at Liajo, we collaborate with the corporates, and then and of course, as Ling said, the inclusion in the workplace. We ensure that these trans people are not getting bullied or harassed in that workplace where most of the people are cisgender. So we try to sensitize the cisgender colleagues as well. So this is how after a lot of steps, we conduct all this process.
Thank you, Natana. And Nico, you work also for a large corporate organization. Tell us a bit more about the work that you do internally to probably address some of the issues that also Tana and Leg were referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. So in full disclosure, I've been at Twitter for 7 weeks, so it's fairly new. But what I can speak to is a lot of the work I did as a consultant and partnering with large, primarily tech organizations. I think a lot of it has to do with representation, and a lot of folks want to say, well, how can we support trans communities within our organizations? And a lot will immediately go to trainings and the need for a common understanding of how to use pronouns, for example, or reviewing our policies to make sure they are trans inclusive, that we have healthcare policies that actually cover us all as individuals with dignity and respect. And yes, that's all important, but I want to go back to Tana's point here about economic liberation and what it means to actually be employed and have jobs, to be able to break that cycle of poverty. So I would argue the best thing you can do for trans inclusion and trans visibility is to actually hire and pay trans people, because that allows them to break the cycle. The rate of poverty in the United States for trans people is 3 times the national average. When you incorporate people of color, that's even higher. So it really is fundamentally about what are we doing to break a system that is not working in our favor, and economic liberation and actually employment allows us to live lives with dignity and support our families and support ourselves as individuals.
So economic empowerment is the key to unleashing broader set of social and, if we want, political, to say, benefits for the trans community. But in particular, I'm interested in, obviously, the role that we can play as the ImpactHub network in supporting this community. Now, we are not employers. We employ a few people, of course, and we're actually creators of jobs in a broader sense of the term, because, as you know, the SME sector in particular, and now we're in the middle of the COVID crisis, and this has been the case with all the crises around the world. Whenever there's a crisis of this sort, it is the SME sector, the small and medium enterprises, the ones that then help rebuild the economy from the bottom, and that in many parts of the world hold up 90% of the employment rate. It is not the big corporations, not the big companies. So in that sense, small and medium entrepreneurs are the ones that actually are really pushing for this drive of employment around the world. And we are very excited to play the role of supporting entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs in particular throughout the world. And so the question to you, and I started to go this time and I worked my way back to like, the question to you is like, what do you think we could be doing more in our support to social entrepreneurs to ensure that the trans community is also included and supported in this, in the work that we do?
Was that question for me or Lang? I'm sorry.
Sorry, just for you. Sorry, I was saying I'm going to rework my way back to Lang, but starting from you and then going on.
Starting with me.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So I think there's a lot we can do at an individual level. One of the things that really has stuck with me over the years and years of doing this work is that as a single individual, we can't do everything, but everyone can do something. So if we can all contribute a small portion, whether that is just taking the first step of being here today on this webinar to learn about how to support the trans community, that's a great first action item. What are the micro steps that we can take that aren't overwhelming? Like, changing global policy, that's a little overwhelming. I'm not sure a single individual is going to be able to do that, but what are the micro actions that we can take that automatically will lead to accumulation of micro actions, will lead to a macro movement? So this idea of how do we educate ourselves, Alberto, you asked some really fundamental basic questions at the beginning of just Trans 101. And that's a lot of individual, education that we can do ourselves in terms of learning. There are great resources, great organizations around the world that have terminology up on their website. And I think that is also a big component of learning ourselves and doing the work ourselves. So we're not relying on the transgender community and transgender individuals to continuously be educating. Because this work is exhausting and this work takes a lot of time and it is very personal. So if you want to be an A+ ally, I would say the best thing you can do is to continue to learn. And A+ ally is going to automatically in some way inform and help entrepreneurs by knowing these communities, by actively seeking out talent in these communities, and by knowing how to properly support these communities. So that's what I would say in terms of like, if there's anything that you can start when you leave this session is you've already done the first step by coming. And I would say the second step is to continue learning.
And just to follow up on this question though, and then I come to Tana and then to Zach. But Nico, you are in a larger corporate organization. And one of the things that I think strikes me about corporate organizations is that very often they trigger what some people have called intrapreneurship. Okay, so intrapreneurship as a kind of characteristics of an entrepreneur inside an organization. He or she wants to change things, wants to achieve a social, perhaps a social impact of sorts inside the organization. And I would imagine that if you are in your role, you're also playing a role of intrapreneur in a way, because you have to constantly invent maybe new things to make sure that you achieve what you want to achieve. And we are an organization that is designed to support entrepreneurs as well as entrepreneurs. And that's why I come back to the question that I asked you, what do you think that we as ImpactHub Network can be doing more, aside from the individual choices that we make, but as an organization, do you think there is a role that we can play in supporting you in your work? You and people like you around corporate around it.
I think it ultimately comes back to what I had mentioned before. If the education is not done on how to properly do it and how to properly support trans entrepreneurs, say you're using improper terminology or you're unintentionally harming, it is very hard to support us as a community. So I think a lot of that work does need to be done on a personal level so that an organization is built and ready to support trans entrepreneurs. And I will say to you, I mean, trans individuals were built to be entrepreneurs. Our whole lives are on the basis, and the foundation is entrepreneurial. So we are set up to do this work. And supporting trans entrepreneurs means knowing how to properly address individuals, means at not just a ImpactHub level, but that on an individual basis, that people have the education they need to show up to work, to support entrepreneurs. So I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think that personal education and how to be an ally can be excluded from how to show up for trans entrepreneurs. I think it really does need to be cultivated in a very similar manner.
Thank you. And a question to you, Tana, which is related again to the first question I made. What can we do as a network? We are present in Bangladesh now at ImpactHub Dhaka, but there is also many more hubs around the world that will be asking the same question. What can I do locally to support the trans community? What is your recommendation, your suggestion in that sense?
Yeah, like the way Nico is really focusing on allyship. So of course, allyship is very, very important. But beside that, and in my country's perspective, I would say that number one is support. Support, as Alberto, you say that not only job, they had to involve in entrepreneurship as well. So when a transgender person is starting their own SME, own small businesses, support it, support buying from them, support if they need any resources, and at the same time support your trans colleague, like in the workplaces. In our country, a lot of corporates, they don't want to have a trans employee, only reason because another colleague will complain. So stop doing that. Stop, just support your trans colleagues, and just the way Nico said, keep learning if you want to be actually a real ally and if you actually believe in trans rights.
Or like a campaign here in the UK said once with quite a lot of verve, get over it, you know. Some people are trans, get over it. It's very true. And then what do you think? You're an entrepreneur in a sense of yourself, and I agree very much with what Nico said. In fact, I think I've been saying it for quite some time. I think the trans community is primed to become an entrepreneurial driver in our community, because you have to go through such an entrepreneurial journey in the first place, that you are primed. And then doing a startup becomes almost like a joke in a way. So what do you think, like, how do we develop more of an entrepreneurial community within our network?
Well, I think there's lots of steps actually that I think you can do. Firstly, I think the values that all of you have as a member network, because obviously all of your hubs, you may have some unifying like values that are in there. So ensuring that you will make sure that they're a safe space. So for example, you know, you might not tolerate any discrimination, any bullying, harassment, but making sure transphobia is exclusively called out as well, I think is really important. Make sure within each individual, because obviously in some of the places where you're situated, it might not be necessarily very safe for transgender people, but in your hub network, it could be that those spaces act as embassies almost, so that is a safe space that someone can go in and work in, or can exchange ideas. I think allyship can come in different ways as well. And I've really loved hearing a lot of what's going on. I've been finding myself nodding, almost being like, yep, you know, so I'm hearing that there. But I would also really, really actively suggest that, you know, collaboration with transgender people or transgender people in communities is really, really critical. This week, I started a new job actually in a consultancy. And again, what they've done, they've been very vocal and proud about the fact they've got me in there. It's not just about me being trans, but they're not hiding me from clients. They're not hiding me from anyone. It's a case of, this is our team and this is who we are, you know, so having that very unapologetic stance, or having that like, oh, but they're trans, there's none of that at all. So I think that's really important. But I think, you know, where possible, identify areas where perhaps there might be some barriers for transgender people, because obviously sometimes, because of how stigmatized we are as a community, people might not want to buy our products. They might not want to go for our things straight away. So that allyship can come in other ways. So have a collaboration, make sure that, you know, other hub members or incubators or stuff like that are thinking about how they're going to help support projects so that they're going to get the right visibility or even the right exposure, and even mentoring as well, because, you know, all of those things can play. It's about play, you know, it's again those micro acts or those not so micro acts that everyone plays a part to actually creating a more inclusive society, and also the hub network. So I think those areas would perhaps help. But I think definitely ensuring that in terms of values of any hubs that you have or any people in the hubs, they agree to a way that they're going to work and behave with each other so that it can be safe.
We do have a Makers Manifesto, which is specifically calling out to inclusion. And I don't think we have any limits to inclusion. We do say that nobody should be left behind. And that means nobody. And in that sense, I'm reminded that during I think that he's currently still president of Brazil, Mr. Barroso had the very nice idea of discriminating very openly against the LGBT community in Brazil at some point. And as a result, ImpactHub Florianopolis declared exactly what you said, that their hubs were going to be a safe space for anyone in the LGBT community, that they could come there without fear of discrimination or personal attacks in any kind of form. And that was an inspiration for many in the community in Florianopolis to even rally more around the ImpactHub and the values that we stand for. So there's my panel that I am very excited about. And I wanted to just open up the floor now to a couple of questions coming from the audience. As if I have someone supporting me from the director to tell me if there are any questions coming from the audience. Anna, maybe you?
We have had, hi, I'm Tom from the global team. We have had a few questions in the chat, so I'll relay the first one to you from Mariana, who's also from the global team. This is an open question to the panel, no one in specific. How did you manage to break the cycle, and what were the key factors that allowed you to get where you are today?
When you talk about break the cycle, is it, maybe Mariana can qualify what cycle she's talking about and whether this is a question directed to someone specifically.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for the panel. I'm here. To qualify the question, it was really about providing more opportunity for trans people on employment, on career opportunities and pathways. So it was more related to how did you break the vicious cycle of not having those opportunities, and what were the key factors? Thank you.
Who would like to take this question?
Mariana, or go ahead, Lane, please.
Yeah, well, I think because I had my own quite personal battle with employment for a while. I mean, before I got to be I'm now a senior consultant, and that's taken me 6 years to get here. And even at the beginning of this year, I became a bit of an entrepreneur myself because I left a job and then I just freelanced, and I was really scared, to be honest. I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to get here, but I had one bumpy month, but then very luckily I did start getting referrals from other people and people that I'd worked with over the years. But breaking that cycle was hard at first because all I did was whenever I did get a job, I worked really hard. I think I probably overproved myself in a lot of cases, partly because of that representation. And I didn't want people thinking I wanted people to have a more positive attribute, but then from that, I also found that it was more my tenacity and also determination, and also realizing my own value in a lot of ways, which took a long time to happen, but that did help in situations. So I did move to other companies quite a bit because within that, I made sure that I made trans inclusion very central to how we work, but also I had a more intersectional inclusion strategy overall, making it very, very clear that we were looking at everything. So we were looking at the full gamut of, how gender identity intersects with, ethnicity, making sure religion, disability, everything was being focused, and becoming very passionate about inclusion, just generally got a lot more of an allyship model built in. But I think overall being very unapologetic as well about who I am, because I've realized that, again, the biggest barriers that particularly transgender people face, it's other people's bigotry, it's other people's prejudice. And something my mother once told me when I first came out when I was very young, and it stuck with me in terms of having resilience. And she just told me that I should never apologize or be ashamed of who I am. And as a result of that, I told other people that, and they were like, yeah, actually, that is the right thing to do. And then it was just sort of bringing that way of working together in a way that I think it inspired others. And it also meant that I would work also with other networks within organizations to sort of unlock that. And the more empowered people feel, the more engaged they are and the more educated they are. And when they do that, they tend to be more inclusive. So allowing people to feel the benefits of being inclusive and knowing that you're part of something good, I think has inspired more positive behaviors and actions in people. But it isn't an instant process. And I think I've also deliberately worked in sectors as well that actually haven't been traditionally very inclusive, not even to women or people of color or even people that are LGBTQI+, because again, I don't just want to talk to my echo chamber. I don't just want to be around people that I know I already can influence positively. I want to get under the skin and work more with people that are uncomfortable, because generally a lot of it is fear and lack of knowledge. So by being able to give more knowledge and education, that's broken down more barriers. And also businesses know that the ultimate way I've held them to account is where they say we want people to bring their whole selves to work or be themselves. I'm like, well, what about this? These groups of people are missing. Where are they then? You know, so having that as a sort of point of leadership, I think has really helped. And I've empowered other leaders to help make that decision as well.
Thank you, Lang. Can I ask the same question to Nico? And I have to add something.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing, Lang, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the only thing I can add here, Mariana, is we are all here because someone took a chance on us, and we are all here because someone opened a door for us. So I think that exact thing applies for how you can empower the trans community and how you can break that cycle of poverty. Take a chance. Their resume might look slightly different because maybe they had to engage in sex work to survive. Sex work is entrepreneurship. Maybe they don't have a direct cycle of having gone to college and then having interned at a fancy company, but maybe their career path and what they've done in other ways shows those exact same skills. So get creative about what is it that you're looking for in a candidate. Understand those skills you're looking for as opposed to the traditional path that you might be hiring for. And again, coming back to the humility that we are all here because someone took a chance on us. Someone opened a door for us. So if you can do that same thing for someone else.
Take a chance on us. This is a very beautiful image to pass on to our hub. Elizabeth from ImpactHub also asks, maybe Tanya, you have an answer for this. How can we recognize and celebrate the diversity of our teams without coming off as exploitative, as utilitarian in a way? How would you suggest she approaches that particular challenge?
All right, so the term equity, like when in our country, the transgender community are deprived of human rights. So whenever we're thinking about that, and whenever we are doing the collaboration with other corporates, one thing we always remember in our head that we have to give or like have the facility, special facility for the transgender people because they lack it. For example, when we did the collaboration with Patao and Food Panda, it's like the Uber of our country. So the transgender people, they don't own a bicycle and they don't own a smartphone. So we had to ensure that these things are getting from the corporates. So it also, these are some things whenever we are working for equity, establishing the gap, we have to remember this thing. And recognizing and celebrating the diversity, I think diversity is always to celebrate. It is, I think this is how the term is, and not only the gender diversity, but also sexual diversity, but also ethnicity diversity. So diversity is everywhere, and diversity is meant to be celebrated. How we can recognize, like the way Nico is saying again and again, by learning the terminology, by respecting the trans people's pronouns, the way they want to get called. So so respecting them the way we respect cisgender people and supporting them, this is how we can, there's like no other, we have to have another, we often talk about the Pride Month, like why do we need Pride Month, why do we need to celebrate it, something like that. I mean, Pride Month is not only to exaggerating the month, this is to bridge the gap, this is to for justice. So this is all, it's really not you have to do anything extra, it's just to the thing that is not done, you have to make it done and unlearn the bigotry, the misogyny. That's it.
Thank you so much. That's a fantastic answer. I have another question here, which I'll ask Nico, because before we pass on to another question for Lang. Nico, how do you know, it asks Evelyn from ImpactHub Amsterdam, how do you know that someone is transgender? And then how do you know that you can support this person if you don't know they're transgender? How do you support them without asking questions that can be difficult to ask? How do you get to that answer?
I'm really glad you raised that question because it isn't entirely inappropriate to ask someone if they are a transgender. As a society, we've come to the terms that we don't ask people about their bodies, that for some reason, folks think transgender individuals are not applicable to that common rule of social interaction, but we are, and you specifically do not want to ask someone whether or not they are transgender. The work that they are engaged in and the work that they are advocating for will generally be a good sign. I would argue as well, you know, if an individual is working for a trans-led organization, then their shared values are in a similar spot in that they are trying to funnel money and resources to trans communities, whether they are identifying as trans or not. So I would say, back to what Lang said about common values and shared values that the hub has, look for organizations that have those similar values, that are opening doors for transgender individuals, support those individuals. Likely they are involved, whether they identify as trans or not, they are involved in a similar ecosystem that is trying to get to a similar goal. But Alberto, I'm really happy you raised that because I want to emphasize again, it is entirely inappropriate to ask someone whether or not they are transgender.
Yeah, it was Elizabeth from ImpactHub Amsterdam who asked that question. So we thank her. And instead, Mikey from Manila asks Lang specifically, since you mentioned that you want to reach out to people who may not have such a good reaction, given their ignorance and fear, do you have any advice on how to start and manage these difficult conversations? It's a really good question.
Yeah, that's a great one. Well, I think my top tip actually is, you know, sort of try and debunk where some of their attitude is coming from. Quite often people use stereotypes or they start saying these people or those people. And in a lot of cases, they probably haven't met a transgender person ever or a non-binary person that they even know of, because in regard to that other question, I nearly made a bad joke myself in my mind. And I thought, oh no, I left my sign at home, you know, sort of, I didn't realize it wasn't above my head there. I mean, but, you know, because that's the thing, because so many people say they get these ideas. So my top tip actually is sometimes reminding people, sometimes saying, well, have you actually met transgender persons, especially if they're making really strong opinionated statements that might be a bit hostile, it might not be very positive. Sometimes that just diffuses a little bit, because sometimes I found you can say from your own perspective, like, well, actually, I've met someone, or I heard a TED talk, or I've read some resources, because unfortunately the media also does influence us sometimes, whereby there's a lot of commentary about transgender people without them actually being involved in the conversation themselves. So, you know, sometimes I think signposting people to some guidelines, or just a simple, actually, I think you are speaking from a biased perspective, or I've even said to someone before, well, have you actually met someone before? Or my other thing is saying, well, I think you're using a bit of a stereotype there, because, you know, everyone's different, everyone's more complicated, and there's not just one type of person, you know, in the same way that we're all very different. So that would be a way that I would suggest that. But I think just being, just keep an open mind, but also just be clear in those conversations about your own opinions, especially if you are supportive to transgender people. And that generally diffuses the conversation quite actively, but just remind them to go and relate back to where they're getting their information from a lot of the time. And that often can calm the conversation.
Question the sources, as they say, question the sources.
Yeah.
I have one question here from Agi in Lusaka, and she's asking specifically, Tanha, what made you decide to focus on this particular community? What made you decide to do Oslo?
All right, so first of all, empathy in one word. And as I said at the beginning on the conversation, that in our country it's very stigmatized, and what they do is, in our country, the trans women who are called as hijra, they do, like, you know, having all the makeups on, they go to the parks and local transportation to collect money, and whenever I went to talk to them, I found out that how much struggle they are facing every day. On the other hand, the mass people, they are thinking that these hijra people, they're exploiting money, they are doing criminal activities. So in that perspective, I saw how much myths and misconception is there, and we have to initiate to break these taboos. And I saw, and whenever I went to I was really little back then, I was in only grade 4, and whenever I went to some organization telling them like, let's start working with them. Nobody was there. And all the time I was facing, the demotivations. So when I started to go to university, I was like, okay, I'm adult enough. I can start this organization. It need to be started because these people's voice is getting unheard for centuries, for decades. So they need to have a platform to know their voices, their real stories. So the empathy, the compassion, my belief, like in Nico's word, I think I am the A+ ally. I like, no, I have to do something like that. So this is how the platform is created. And right now we have this amazing group of community. We have this like 15 core team members, where 90% of them are transgender people. Maybe a lot of them are closeted, and maybe someday instead of me, there will be another trans person here in summit like that. But before that, I have to make that path for them. So this is how it started.
And being an ally is, of course, another thing that we can do as individuals. For any of us who is not part of the trans community, but becoming an ally is a key instrument. And this goes the same also in the direction of any other kind of minority or inequality or injustice in the world, where you don't necessarily, maybe you don't have the skin color, maybe you don't have the gender of the discriminated group, but you can still feel alive to them and can still do things that are in support. And in that sense, there's a question that comes from Maria. How can we better reach out to the trans community in a sense and involve them in our programs, involve them in our entrepreneurial support actions? What do you suggest we do to become much more inclusive in that sense and to reach out to them? I'll ask the question to Nico. Unless you're below me or next to me in the.
Yeah, I can answer, and I'm really curious to hear from my colleagues here, just on an international scale. I think one of the best things you can do is expand your network. Our networks, professional networks especially, are strongly homogenous. They look a lot like us, and that just has to do with this human-centered bias that we have as individuals. So beginning to expand your network, attend talks like these, now you know trans individuals and people who are advocating for trans individuals. So when you have an open role at your organization and you post that on LinkedIn, if your network is broader, more people will see that. I think there's also lots of different organizations that focus on career paths. For example, Transend, just as an example. Think about where you're posting jobs in terms of different job boards, not the usual suspects, but thinking actively searching, whether you have recruiters actively doing that search, to think about, here are some different avenues that we might be considering. And, I think ultimately it comes down to that aspect of rethinking what the traditional candidate will look like, or what the traditional entrepreneur will look like, or who's worth being invested in, and trying to broaden your understanding, and you actively doing the work to find organizations that are doing work to promote entrepreneurs, or promote education, or promote resources and career development. That's one of the best ways I've seen to be able to even just engage with trans entrepreneurs and also professionals, and understanding that the reality is not all of us can be openly trans in a professional settings. A lot of us have to remain in the closet for our safety, not just at work, but in our communities as well.
Of course. And can I ask like the same question? What do you think? How can we reach more into the trans community? For example, in a place like London, of course, where we're both based, there seems to be a lot of connections and potential connection points, but in reality, we still see there's a lot of trans men and women don't embrace an entrepreneurial journey, and maybe would it be a perfect journey for them in many ways, as you said before. So how can we do more to reach into them, into the community more?
I think definitely, to echo Nico's point, I think expanding networks is going to be really, really important. But I think as the Hub network collectively, in terms of communications it puts out, it's a really good time to signal that it's trans inclusive. So when there are times like Trans Day of Visibility that happens every March, putting my sort of more communications hat on here, I find that actually by promoting that, if you do have any trans members in the network, maybe, promoting them, or at least putting a spotlight on them, so that maybe that's another way of people in the community knowing that, you know, it's not just a trans exclusive organization. But another area of that as well is that if you do have any specific projects or even mentoring programs or anything like that that can actually bring more people in, because if the main issue is that you don't have anyone in the network, and that's fine if that is the case, stuff like that I think will really help. But that's a good way of starting and igniting that conversations. It could be that for existing hubs or hub members that might have capacity to mentor, or at least provide some upskilling or opportunities or some space for collaboration or internships, anything like that, that can be a way of actually starting to generate a wider network. What is the International Trans Day of Visibility? What day will be on March 6th? That's the 31st of March. 31st of March. Okay, so 31st of March, communication people around the world of the hubs. Now you are alerted. We have a task. We have to become more trans inclusive, and we have this date to get ready for. I wondered if there were any more advices or other questions that we had from the hubs, and seeking again support from our global team members. If you can direct me to any comments that are to be read out.
The one thing I want to add to, oh, I'm sorry, Tana, go ahead.
No, please.
I just wanted to add one thing that, yes, Trans Day visibility is very important. Pride, I know this is happening during June, but I want to just emphasize that our lives happen 365 days a year, 366 on leap year. So that these conversations don't need to just happen in June. They don't just need to happen around Trans Day visibility. This advocacy can be happening year round. So just want to put that in folks' mind as a quick.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. We have a question. Yeah, Tana, if you want to add something.
Yeah, so like adding on the previous question, as Nico and Ling was talking about it, I would like to add one thing, maybe a bit negative, which is like we often, the trans activists, we often see that the queer baits and the rainbow wash that happens during the Pride Month or in the other time. So, and we see how the corporates aim to hire or do something like inclusive only for the sake of marketing purpose. So I would say that no, please stop doing that. If you really want to want the trans right to get upheld, so stop doing all these things. If you believe in trans right, act on that. Act on the way Nico and Ling was saying.
So any day of the year, really, not just the 31st of March. Yes, I understand that. Probably we want it just on the 31st if we do. There is also a question that comes from Mala, I believe, from ImpactHub. I can't tell where she ImpactHub from. Maybe she can tell us herself. Sorry. Would you encourage everyone to include their pronouns when introducing themselves? Why or why not? Who wants to take this question? Lang?
I'm happy to, yeah, Lane, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Yesterday I had 5 conversations about pronouns, so I feel it's following me like wherever I go.
It clearly is a topic of the moment.
I think, well, with pronouns, like I say, I think there are ways that we can introduce pronouns. Like, for example, if you're having video calls, like right now, all of us, the participants today, we've all put our pronouns in our signature, in our name signatures here, email signatures. It's not that hard. I think also if you're on calls as well, sometimes, sort of say my pronouns are he and him, because actually there are some names culturally that interchangeable someone could think it's female in one country and male in another, and that might not be how you're addressed. And also many of us internationally have worked with someone called Alex at least once in our lives. And Alex doesn't have to be trans or non-binary. Alex may be cisgender, and there's lots of Alexes that we don't know who they are. And actually, and even my name sometimes gets, misunderstood by people as well. So I feel that it's just about politeness, really. And also, I think if there's any phonics spellings about pronunciation of names as well, I think that's really important as well, because I think in this day and age, it's important. People want to get things right when they interact. So again, pronouns in an email signature on Zoom, put it in here. it's really not that hard.
I think you're in favor then of using it.
Absolutely, because I just think it helps. And you know, because I was working in a role that involved a lot of European countries, and I had someone in one particular country who got very annoyed about pronouns, and they were telling me, they were like, "Wow, I don't feel, you know, I got this full on, you know, through here, you know, what it was." But anyway, then this person's name was Michelle, and anyway, I explained to Michelle that obviously in England that's considered a female name, and anyway, Michelle very quickly then added pronouns to their signature, so it did get a point across, you know, maybe not in the original intention, but it was, you know, because it's not just about a trans thing, but also if people do use they and things like that, it's providing that space. And so I really don't know why people get so upset and offended by it, because like I say, there might be an Alex, there might be a Michelle, or it's just how we want to refer to ourselves. And ultimately we want to get things right. And in business or at work or even socially, just saying, you know, and if I'm unsure about pronouns with someone as well, sometimes I've asked what pronouns they use, or another top tip I will share is just try not to gender things in the first place. Things don't have to be so he and she focused in a conversation anyway. So that can also help too.
This is quite easy to imagine in the English language. It's not that easy to imagine in the Italian language, my native language, where everything is genderized, including every object in the house. Everything is either a female or a male, and non-binary objects do not exist. So that's going to be an interesting one to come down in Italy. I have another couple of questions here that are quite interesting, and one in particular caught my eye, which is from Grace in Houston. How do you recommend organizations like ours plan for the possibility that transphobic sponsors or partners may end their support if you advocate actively for LGBTQ plus inclusion? Now, this is a really interesting question. Of course, one of my major jobs is to raise funds for the network. So as a partner that suddenly turns away and walks away, maybe with a significant amount of sponsorship, actually strikes fear in my heart. But at the same time, I would be quite resolute. What is your advice to handle a situation like that?
I can take that one quickly, actually, because I've been in businesses before where we have actually withdrawn support to organizations, because there are a couple of places that that two businesses I were in, actually, we were actually using jobs boards that were linked to a main website called Mumsnet. And because that started to become a bit of a hotbed of transphobia, and it was providing that, we as companies actually withdrew from it. And we actually did that very consciously, because within our terms and conditions, and also with our procurement contracts and all of our agreements in terms of our commitment to inclusion and how we would be, if there's a violation in that instance, well, sometimes that's where you will have to step into that conversation. And it is about, are you living your values, or are you walking the walk? So I've been from the company side where we've withdrawn that, but also in situations, and even when I worked at Stonewall as well for a few years, and there were some places funding that we couldn't take money from, especially if it turned out that they were, you know, funding sort of conversion therapy for LGBT people or things like that, if we knew about the funding routes. So it's really important to follow your money trails. I know at times we need financial support, but try not to see pound, euro, dollar signs, or whatever other currency in that sort of main area. You know, it's always important to look at the integrity of where that's from, because especially with the values of your organization and what you want your projects to be, and also if you know what your intentions are for your projects and the communities you want to reach, then sometimes you do have to have a hard line on something. So that's what I would say in relation to that.
So like, do your homework, make sure that when you do get money from someone, that you understand the values of this organization, of these individuals, and that you don't get a bad surprise down the line when you decide to do something that is entirely aligned with our values, which is supporting a minority, supporting a community that is victimized in some way. So I hope Grace answers your question, but it's a great question, of course, because there is so many of this crisscrossing of issues. Now, I think there are about 3 minutes left to the event. Am I correct, Director? Is that, yeah. So in the last 3 minutes, I'm going to give you 1 minute each to launch a last minute message. It could be anything to like, have a great time, and to what is it that really you're holding in your heart right now and you would like to share with our global network today. And I will start with Tanha, please.
All right. So, so like the last message I would have for all the people here, or people will maybe listen later, is that I believe that here is like 60 plus people, and all of you actually believe in trans right, and this is why you are here today. So if you actually do believe in trans right, act through it. For example, in a hangout, one of your friend is talking something transphobic or gay shaming another person, stop them. So, or like if you are an investor, invest in trans businesses. And if you are a customer, buy from the trans-led small businesses. So these are like the small steps we had, all the people here, we have to start doing it. And this is the only thing I want to share. Act on it if you actually believe in it.
Thank you, Tana. Nico, can I ask you the same question? Your last minute.
You know, I have very few things to add. I think Tana completely dropped the mic, like end of discussion. The only thing I would add is just advocacy with your wallet, with your mind, and with your heart. And if you can remember those three things, then it's very hard to do the wrong thing. So just remember that you have tremendous impact, whether it is with the dollars you spend or the currency you spend, or whether it's someone you're hiring or thinking about how to support an entrepreneur, or whether it's someone you are trying to support with your heart, whether it's through their personal journey or stopping someone else from hurting them. So just remembering advocacy with heart, mind, and your wallet, and I think you're in a good place.
Thank you so much, Nico. And Lang, what is your last good night message?
I think my main message that I leave people is that trans and non-binary people, they're not a problem. It's other people's bigotry that is. So be unapologetic about your inclusion, especially when ultimately who you are and who you love should not be up for debate or be a crime.
Be unapologetic. I love that too. And love that. The wallet, the mind, the heart. And with this, I would like to thank once again Tanha, Nico, and Lang for joining us tonight, and all of you makers from around the world who have joined us for this session. It's been really a privilege to be your host